Sideshow is offering free tickets to the Slaughterhouse. Here's your look at the new Sideshow Collectibles, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the Killing Mask, Leatherface, 6-scale figure. Inspired by his iconic appearance in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974, the Leatherface Killing Mask 6-scale figure features a tailored fabric costume consisting of a collared shirt, black pants, and patterned necktie with bloodied yellow butcher's apron, in addition to the sculpted black boots. A padded undersuit fills out the killer cannibal's intimidating silhouette. Leatherface's namesake portrait is unsettling detailed with solid coloration and false skin exterior. Wild hair atop his head and disturbing stitched elements are all sculpted to capture his haunting appearance. While Leatherface stops for a bite to eat, let's go ahead and grab the tape measure just to see how tall the figure stands. And don't worry, I will bring in a couple of figures in a second for comparisons. But Leatherface, though, in the meantime, right to the very top of his rather disgusting looking mask, the figure stands in this case about 11 3/4 of an inch tall, or the figure is going to be about 30 centimeters in height. And okay, here's what the Killing Mask Leatherface that we're about to have a look at looks like, along with the Pretty Lady Leatherface, also released by the same company, also Sideshow Collectibles. Now, while it may look like the Pretty Lady is a bigger looking figure, I think a lot of it really has to do with the fact that that specific mask does have a little bit more flowing locks out the top. If, though, you look at them from shoulder to shoulder and you really remove the idea that this Leatherface on the left is actually wearing a jacket, then they're roughly going to be about the same size to one another. I thought initially maybe that one was a little bit bigger than the other, but really if you do put them back to back, which let's just do that right now, you put them back to back, yeah, they're about the same size as one another. Masks are really about the only thing that does change between the two. Then, of course, one other comparison I'm sure you guys would most want to see the most, is also what he looks like with the Leatherface from the 3-0. Now, I will be eventually retiring this figure. I did like the figure at the time that 3-0 was putting it out, but I think the time has come to maybe pass that on to another collector if anybody was certainly interested. It was fine for its time, but I do think that there was some creative luxuries made when they certainly designed this Leatherface to really the fair credit of the one that we now get from Sideshow. I think not only is the shirt a better, more appropriate color the way it looks in the film, but also Leatherface proportionately looks a lot better with the Pretty Lady version of Leatherface, the one that we've already looked at before. Before we look at the weapons that Leatherface wields, let's first have a look at the display stand that comes included with the figure. If you are one that likes to collect yourself the Sideshow Collectibles figures, then by now you already recognize these type of display stands. This hexagonal shaped display stand, molded only in just a matte black plastic, does have, at least to its credit, printed along the top, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It does take up a lot of real estate space though, especially if you have the figure standing on top of it. I probably would have shrunk the logo down, or at the very least, maybe condensed it so it wasn't taking up so much space. There's no front placard or anything to indicate that this is Leatherface, but if you are fans of the franchise, the one even from the original 74 film, then of course you already know who the character is. You don't necessarily need a placard on the front. What you will maybe need, though, is the adjustable neck that attaches onto the back post here. It actually comes in two parts, so you'll see already there's a hole there in the back. You just take the post, plug it in. Wow, that was one of the most simplest tutorials I think I've ever done here on this channel. And then from there, this whole back section does lift and lower. These are the ones also that they've used before for other figures, so you'll notice there's 3 holes in the back. That's not breathing holes. It doesn't need to breathe, but that's actually there for adjustable, well, extra standing parts that they use for other figures. The one that comes to my mind is actually, I think the Deadpool had some extra parts that went along the back. But yeah, a basic standard stand, of course, for obvious reasons. You're probably going to want to then use this for Leatherface, especially if you're going to have him in any running pose. If you're going to have him just in a museum pose, which isn't the most exciting of things to look at, then you really don't necessarily need yourself the display stand, but it's there if you ever need to use it. What I feel you're more likely to use, though, are the included accessories that come included with the Killing Mask Leatherface. Like, for example, the figure comes included with a sledgehammer. Good for, of course, whacking somebody on the head and having them flopping around on the floor like a fish dying on dry land. Yeah, the sledgehammer, as you can see, is using a dark gunmetal gray for at least the head portion of the sledgehammer, while the rest of the handle is left with more of a medium brown. And for all intents and purposes, this does fit into Bubba's hands, though really not the hands that are currently in the sockets of the forearms. This is basically how the figure looks like when you get him first stock out of the packaging. So we're going to come back to that in a second. Like its namesake, though, Leatherface also comes included with the chainsaw. And if though the chainsaw looks somewhat familiar to you, obviously it does. It's in the movie. But it happens to also be, I'm going to bring in the one that came included with the Pretty Woman Leatherface. Short of the fact that there's a little bit more blood on the teeth of this chainsaw, Bubba's been busy. It looks to be an identical carbon copy of the chainsaw, which realistically it should anyways. I do like that at least they did use the same design of the chainsaw, nice yellow overall on this one. This one does have a little bit more brighter of a yellow. This one has more of a faded yellow. And you can also see as well, like mentioned already, there's a lot more blood splattered on the teeth of the chainsaw that comes included with the Killing Mask, and less that came included with the Pretty Woman Leatherface. Both of them actually do fit into his hand again. Not really going to be doing much of that right now because he doesn't have the proper hands to hold either one of these things. We're going to then move that out of the way. There's nothing that actually moves on this. You can't pull the cord out or anything along those lines. But it's got some really nice scratched away areas of paint, leaving behind the silver underneath. Really cool looking chainsaw. Going to put that to the side. And of course, to accomplish then the two accessories we've already had a look at, Leatherface comes included with a series of interchangeable hands. As I already mentioned, the figure does have closed fists right now in his forearms, so it's not going to be helping anybody. Well, let's switch those out. The figure does come include some gripping hands. Now, the hands are, of course, for this side, depending on which way you're facing us, of course, the left side, the right side, or again, flipping it the proper way. But either way, though, he does have some gripping hands. In all the cases, they seem to be using the same hands as the ones we already got before with the Michael Myers from, of course, Sideshow Collectibles as well. So one thing you'll notice right away with these hands is they're a little bit more reddish as you get closer to the fingertips, and a little more paler as you move away from them. Again, nice looking hands for what they are. One thing that was rather interesting, though, is that this hand is more relaxed on this side than on this side here. So if you did decide you wanted to have the sledgehammer, for example, to be wielded on this side of Leatherface's body, the sledgehammer sits admittingly a little bit more looser with using this then hand. Also, though, if you really want to be accurate to the movie, he does technically swing that sledgehammer from this side. So then if you wanted to use this hand is actually doing a much better job of holding the sledgehammer. You can easily tip that upside down. Then, of course, besides those, the figure also comes included with what I can only describe to be as arthritic hands, or they almost look like Thing from the Addams Family. Again, you've got more of the reddish color there on the ends of the fingers, paler as we get progressively further up the forearm. And you can again see like there's some nice additional veinage that they did add to the hands. I don't mind these hands, but it does look a little weird that you've got such redness on the ends of the fingers and then it gets so pale as I get further up. I mean, really, when you look at just the forearms alone, there's no paint that seems to be happening here on Leatherface. There's a lot of veins, yes, but there's not really a lot of color, so it does feel like it's missing a lot of paint. So then when you then bring in hands like this, for example, which these are just, again, relaxed hands, you can really see there's a lot more paint and effort being made to the fingertips that I wish that more of that was actually being made for the rest of the forearms too. To changing out the hands, pretty easy, in fact. You go ahead and just easily remove the form. And one thing I do think that's to the credit of Sideshow is that each of the hands come with their dedicated pegs, so you don't have to worry about trying to fish out a peg if you happen to leave it behind in the forearm. Then from there, let's go ahead and grab ourselves a hand here. Give this guy a hand, whether it's his or not. Plug that then in place. Be careful, though, on this side, though, because he does have, again, the charm bracelet. I never liked the charm bracelet on the Pretty Woman Leatherface. I just wish there was an easier way. I wish they could have just attached it really to the forearm. It's never something I'm ever going to remove. You can see there's the charm there on the bracelets. Well, bracelet with charms on it. Just, though, be careful because the charm bracelet is a separate piece. And it's so very easily lost if you're not too careful. You really do have to fit this over his forearm. And the real problem with the bracelet also is obviously, it's bigger to fit over his forearm, but it's not big enough to fit all the way across his forearm. So you always feel like you're never quite getting it all the way around his forearm. Does that make any sense? I hope so. Let's go ahead and get at least a gripping hand in there to hold the bracelet in place. And you're always finding, at least I am at least, always finding myself having to fish the bracelet out from the socket. It always gets stuck in there. We'll leave it there, at least for right now, and just to then show you guys the accessories we finished having a look at. There's what he looks like with the sledgehammer, so we can go ahead and slide that into his arm, slide it into his hand. And yeah, you can get that iconic look of Leatherface swinging back the sledgehammer and knocking that poor guy's brains out. That's a really great way of displaying the figure. If you didn't want to, of course, have him displayed with the chainsaw. I know most people would probably be leaning to the idea of displaying with the chainsaw instead. So let's go ahead then and pull the sledgehammer out, not knocking the figure over in the process. Let's grab then the chainsaw. And the chainsaw, like obviously you're going to have one side of a handle, and then you're going to have a handle on the top. Now, if you have any hard time to do this, I find it's helpful, at least with this hand, because I really don't want to mess with the one that has the charm bracelet there. Just pry the fingers ever slightly away from the palm. If you're having any difficult time to do this, you can also sort of just hold it back with your fingers. At least the plastic that they used for the hands are soft enough, at least, that it doesn't make things super difficult. I mean, obviously it looks like I'm having more of a struggle right now to do this, only because I'm in front of the camera. But yeah, you can fit the hand. Why are we doing this? Why are we having such a hard time to do this? Fit the hand over the handle. Finally got it. I don't know why it took me so long to do it. And actually, in fact, it's a lot easier if you just take the top of the chainsaw, like from the corner end of things, get it just underneath the thumb, and then from there easily. Why was I struggling so much with that earlier? But once that's in place, then fit that back into the form, and then just bring the arm around. At least because he does have the double bend in the elbow, it makes things pretty easy, in fact, for him to hold the chainsaw. And you can get some pretty good looks like he does have in the movie. Again, I just want to be careful of the charm bracelet here. Just fit the thumb over that, and there you got chainsaw wielding Leatherface. Looks good. Does look good. You know, again, like my biggest issue is not necessarily the fact that the figure is under-delivered when it comes to his accessories. I mean, really, when it comes to the killing mask of Leatherface, all I would really have wanted anyways are the things that come included with the figure, the sledgehammer, and then the obvious one being the chainsaw. Let's go ahead and remove that now from his hands. We'll come back to that, of course, I'm sure, for final looks. Just go ahead and remove this also, and we'll put that to the side. Getting, though, a closer look at Leatherface, I want to make sure, first of all, I'm going to fix this charm bracelet, even if it kills me. Maybe I probably shouldn't have said that. Let's just fit that over back on his form. Just again, like look at the sizing of it. It's just not big enough. It may seem like I'm having a harder time with this than what you would have with this, but take my advice. I mean, obviously, when you do get this figure for yourself, if you do decide to get this figure for yourself, you are going to be fighting. I finally got it. Finally got it. Let's go ahead and get the hand back on there before we mess things up. Okay, finally got that in place. Okay, so getting a closer look at Leatherface here, at least from the Killing Mask standpoint. This is basically the original 74 mask. You know what? For the most part, it does things pretty good. Where I feel it under-delivers, though, is the paint. The paint is always really one of the biggest problems for Sideshow collectibles. Not only that, but then they take some creative luxuries when it comes to designing their characters. Freddy, Michael Myers. But in this case, at least they stick pretty close to the source material. I think the mask overall is handled well. Where I think it under-delivers, though, is the paint that they applied to the face. Sort of has one coloring to it, a very muddiness to it. And while I wouldn't necessarily want my Bubba to have blood splattered all across his face, I think that would get way too busy, way too complicated. I think where they really should have added a little bit of much needed paint is obviously that this skin starts to age, and he's wearing this across his face. I really think that there should have been some darker patches added in there, some darker contrasting colors especially added to the face, for example, because it's all sort of really the same color. And really, if you go back and you watch the film again, there are areas to the mask that look a little bit more darker. There are some areas to the mask that almost have like a yellowish tint to it. We're essentially getting one color to this mask. While there are some deviations, you can see kind of on the back of the mask where it's a little bit more of that yellowish color I was talking about. I really think for an area of figure that has so many different stitched up pieces, that those pieces should have had different colors being reflected on them. The stitches are good, and of course you got the little strand of string that comes out from the back of the mask. You got a little bit of the flaps there also on the front that cover off his regular ears underneath. That all does check the boxes nicely for Leatherface, but it's really the under-delivering of the paint where I feel like this figure lets me down. I wouldn't necessarily say his outfit lets me down. To go back and then watch it again, he does have the pink striped shirt. Although in this case, I will say it's much too clean, especially for how much blood he manages to get all over his apron. I get the whole idea of why the apron has to be there in the first place. It's to protect whatever he's wearing underneath. But in this case, I really think that something should have settled on the surface of the fabric here. Grime it up. Add a little bit of dirt, add a little bit of sweat, especially under the armpits here. Maybe I don't want to bring his arms up like this too much. At least a little bit of mud or something caked on the surface. The shirt, I feel, is way too clean. One thing I did actually do in setting up for this review is I did actually take his tie and pull it out from underneath his apron. His tie was tucked in behind the apron. I just pulled it out. And though, like the Pretty Woman, unfortunately, we looked at before, this tie is never right. Every time you think you want to flatten this out, the tie seems to have other ideas in mind. I might even just try to take myself like an iron and see if I can iron this out just to make it as flat as I can. I think, in fact, in the movie, it's a little shorter than what we get right here. It's also seeming to be a little bit wider. It does have still the same print here on the front, but it just doesn't sit properly on the figure. That's more just by the way they've actually knotted it here on the top of it. I mean, I could probably try to untie that, but I'd never be able to get that back in place. I can't even tie my own tie, let alone a 6-scale figure of Leatherface. So I think the tie is really one thing that's really a bit of a problematic thing on the figure. And that, of course, and the fact that the shirt is way too clean for my liking. Another thing that really bothers me about this figure is the fact that he does have, well, decently sculpted arms. He doesn't have like the really skinny arms like the older Sideshow collectible 6-scale figures. He's given bigger, broader arms, but he's given these unrealistic veins there in his arms. They just seem to be randomly placed anywhere. And without the actual appreciation of paint added to this either, it just looks like bare basic plastic. I wish they could have gone in there and could have added little hairs, sculpted something in there, or at the very least painted it, or again added a little bit of dirt or something to it. It's just like the shirt, it's way too clean. It really needed a lot more paint than what it actually gets. If I did, though, lift up the apron itself is sort of made of a plastic material. Underneath, he looks to be wearing the same pants, of course, as the Pretty Woman. Blue, of course, slacks, and he does have the cowboy boots underneath it. He does have padding as well. Although, again, I'm just going to reach off. Do bear with me. Just reach off to the side here and bring in the Pretty Woman Leatherface. He seems a little bit more, certainly, portlier. I mean, I guess he's been eating a little bit at dinner time, but he does seem a little fuller with the Pretty Woman Leatherface than what we actually get with the Killing Mask. I mean, again, it's not that far-fetched. At least they do look like they're fuller, that they're not just using the 6-scale bodies underneath. But I also would have added a lot more padding to this figure along the same lines of what we got with the Pretty Woman. For the articulation on Leatherface, let's go back to his head sculpt just one last time to show you guys what the head looks like. I try my best in these reviews to get as close in as possible so you guys can see all the finer features as much as I possibly can provide you guys before we actually look at the articulation of the figure. Okay, so his head is on a ball joint, so already it moves up, it already then moves down, and you can rock it back and forth. I kind of like the idea of Leatherface with his head slightly tilted to the side. He never really understood what was always going on. His arms do come out, once again, standard articulation underneath these figures, and because the shirt's a little looser in the sleeve, he easily can bring his arms out at 90 degrees. I don't know why I'm doing that. You can bring the arms forward, yes. You can bring the arms back, yes. There also seems to be a socketed joint on the actual arms themselves, the shoulder area. I can't help but also notice, yeah, he does have padding down below here, but it seems like he actually has like an overlaid suit, as it's certainly softer plastic here. For the obvious reasons, I'm not going to start stripping this guy down because I know I'd never be able to get everything back the way it was, but take my word, take my advice. I guess more my word than my advice. There's actually softer plastic underneath here. It seems like they are using like maybe like a rubber suit or a slightly more softer plastic part that goes over top of his torso. Let's not manhandle Leatherface's boobies. The figure does have a swivel in his bicep. The figure also does possess a double hinge on the elbow. It sort of does look disjointed just by the makeup of this particular joint, that when you do bend the elbow too far the extreme, it does sort of cut the side of the elbow off, which obviously is one case that's just unavoidable. There's no really way around that. The figure does have wrist articulation, so you can rotate those all the way around, move them back and forth. Just be careful, again, of the charm bracelet. Did I even get the chance to show you guys what the charm bracelet looks like? There you go. You got it? Oh, wait, somebody's in the back didn't get a chance to see it. Okay, you got it, Bill? Okay, good. As for the upper torso, the torso, once again, seems to be like other figures we looked at before, sort of have an upper torso ball joint, so you can kind of rock it back and forth, move it up, move it down. But again, there's some little hindering padding that they've added to the front of the body. Legs do, though, split. A little bit more limited, of course, because he's tied up an apron on the front of his body. The legs do still manage to split, just only by a little bit. You can take the legs and move them forward. You can move them back. There is still padding. Lots of padding here on the thigh, just to kind of beef up those legs. The figure does have a double hinge on the knee, and like the figure we looked at before, while the boots themselves are really hard plastic, you still can manage to move them only up and down slightly, but the figure does also have the means to rotate his feet back and forth, and that's what the sculpting. And the paintwork is actually nice on the backs and the bottoms of his feet. They've actually scuffed up the soles, as it naturally would have been the case with Leatherface running after these poor people. You know, again, overall, I think there's more I like about the figure than what I don't like. Some of you may have even heard when I had the premiere last, I was talking about getting this figure and being really disappointed with him overall. And, you know, honestly, the more time I've spent with him, for him being the killing mask Leatherface, or again, the OG Leatherface mask, let's just slide this guy over. I would say from at least a paint standpoint, I feel like he's almost a step down, though, from the Pretty Woman. Now, obviously, in this case, let's not knock the figures over in the process. This is why, of course, display stands always come in handy. But I feel like in a case like this, the Pretty Woman Leatherface is the superior of the two. Just hopefully getting him to stand. There we go. Yeah, again, when you have the two figures, obviously, if you're a fan of the original 74 classic, you're likely probably going to be still getting the Killing Mask Leatherface, even if you already picked yourself up the Pretty Woman Leatherface. And really, of the two, my favorite is still the Pretty Woman. It's just a nicer looking Leatherface. It's also a fuller looking Leatherface, too. There's a lot more padding that they added to the tummy-tum area. The Killing Mask, for it being the OG look of Leatherface, does look pretty good. I still have the problem with, of course, the tie not being straight. I have to fix that up. The shirt could have been a lot grimier than what it is, and really with not any paint being added to the forearms then result sort of looking like they're just made of bare plastic. It would likely then use the same arms when it came to the Pretty Woman Leatherface, but with the Pretty Woman already wearing a jacket over top of it, it hides sort of all the imperfections that, unfortunately, the Killing Mask Leatherface basically just showcases it, having only wearing short sleeves. Now, there could be a very strong possibility that the person behind the camera was maybe a tad bit too hard on Killing Mask Leatherface. You know, for what he is, and if I was to compare him with, say, the likes of Freddy Krueger that we got from Sideshow Collectibles, and even the Michael Myers, that did take some creative luxuries, I feel, from Sideshow's part, not at all looking like the characters from the movie that they're supposed to be depicted from. Leatherface at least looks like Leatherface from the 1974 film. It is lacking, of course, the obvious places of paint, like in his shirt. The shirt should have been a lot more scuffy and dirtier and sweatier and bloodier than what we actually get. The shirt is way too clean for my liking. And of course, because he does have the bare exposed forearms like this, it really does show a lot of the problems that were hidden, really, all honestly, when it came to the Pretty Woman Leatherface. He was wearing the same body, the same arms, but because he was underneath the jacket, it did a better job of finishing the figure. The biggest thing about this figure is he feels unfinished, both in the mask with just not enough paint, both also with the shirt and the forearms. It's a good-looking Leatherface, it just needed that much more. And maybe my bitterness from this figure didn't stem necessarily from what Sideshow did to the figure, but rather what the price was when this guy was all said and done. This guy, if you wanted to pick this guy up over on Sideshow, which is actually where I picked this guy up, he was $240, which doesn't seem so bad. $240, yeah, he's a bare bones release of Leatherface. He did get himself at least a display stand, a sledgehammer, of course the chainsaw, and some swappable hands, so he at least did get that. But $240 is a little higher than what normal figures would normally be when you strip everything down and you give them, like, again, the bare bones accessories. $240, that's also US dollars. So for me being in Canada already, picking up a figure that's $240 is already well into the sort of mid 300s. By the time I start paying the shipping, then I also had to pay the brokerage fees. This guy was actually over $400 when eventually I got this guy to my doorstep. And maybe that's the thing that's making me feel a little bit more bitter towards this figure. He's not necessarily a bad Leatherface. He's just a Leatherface that needed just a little bit more TLC. What do you guys think of this figure? Let me know down below in the comments section. I think really the biggest thing for me is if Sideshow was to release a Leatherface, I think they should have done the Killing Mask 74 mask first. Then they should have done the Pretty Woman. I think if anything, they set the bar really high with the Pretty Woman, that as a result of that, the OG mask sort of does feel like it's under-delivers just a little bit. But what do you guys think of this figure? Let me know down below in the comments section. And is this a figure you're going to pick up and want to add to your collection? Weigh in your thoughts down below in the comments section. Also, as well, if you enjoyed this video, why not hit it with a like? If you guys are loving the content you guys are seeing and certainly on board to see more, then make sure you hit the subscribe button down below. and that you're also turning on the bell notification. There's going to be more 6-scale scares coming your way, so if that's the kind of thing that brings all the boys to the yard, then make sure you're coming back to this yard, because there's definitely going to be a lot more coming your way. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.